Hello and welcome. I'm Darren, and today we are going to discuss one of the probably biggest things that came from the last generation, the moment in time which was pointed out and is pointed out on every benchmark going by obviously a certain side, is the moment when the 4080 ran out of VRAM. And this is it. So I wanted to have a little bit of a further look because I've kind of been involved in comments which I think, personally, I think are a bit dumb. Okay. And I'm going to explain the reason why I think they're a bit dumb. But the truth is it did run out of VRAM. Okay. So there is no denying that. Would it have been better if it had more VRAM? Absolutely. No denying that. Am I defending NVIDIA? No, I'm not. It's probably a reason why I went buy a 5080, although well, I don't know how to put that. I suppose if the 5080 would have been a larger improvement, I don't think the 16 gigabytes of VRAM would have really been a complete game changer for me. If they were to make now a 5080 Ti Super that is better performance than a 4090 and has at least 20 gigabytes of VRAM and isn't a ridiculous price, then that might be something I'm interested in. But is 16 gigabytes of VRAM an absolute killer? No. And I'm going to go through the reasons why. And to be fair, probably the absolute most reason why is because of DLSS 4. Now, I know that that's a trigger word for a lot of people. I know people get quite upset about that, but it is a fairly big improvement. And the good thing is it's a good improvement for NVIDIA users as a whole, which was something that I wasn't particularly expecting, but I'm going to take it, and it is quite a big win. And the reason why is the picture that we're looking at now. So effectively, yes, this game will run out of VRAM on the RTX 4080, but it runs out of VRAM when you're using path tracing. A lot of people wrongly, I think, make the comment that you can't run the Supreme settings on the 4080 because it doesn't have enough VRAM. That's bullshit. Okay, so we can go to the Supreme settings, as you can see here. So we're not using ray tracing, we're using the Supreme settings, and you can see quite easily there that we're not running out of VRAM. If I wasn't screen capturing, we'd actually be below 14 gigabytes of allocated and under 13 of actual usage. So you can run the Supreme settings on the RTX 4080 and you don't run out of VRAM. Obviously on the 7900 XTX, you can run the Supreme settings and you don't run out of VRAM. What you can't do, which is why I think it's a bit of a stupid one, because this is obviously an argument that's coming from the AMD fanboy base. What they fail to realize is that you can run no RT Supreme settings at 4K on both of these GPUs quite comfortably and have great FPS. Everything's hunky-dory. There's only one GPU that is limited after that at what it can do, and it's not the 4080, it's the 7900 XTX, because what that GPU can't do is run path tracing. Now with the NVIDIA GPU you can, and we're going to kind of look into the impact on that, because I got in another conversation with someone that was saying like you wouldn't do it because of the limited performance that you'd get by doing it, or I can't remember exactly how he worded it. Basically almost saying that you'd get such a degradation by forcing the path tracing that it would be stupid to do. You do get a degradation because the main factor is you can run obviously the Supreme settings at DLSS quality, and to run the path tracing mode you're going down to DLSS performance. Like I said, the big game changer in that is the new transformer model, because DLSS performance has now become a very viable option. Are you losing Are you gaining? That's down to the individual to decide, because what I will say is, as we look through this video, you might like path tracing or you might not like path tracing, because it is a very transformative image. Now, as you can see here, with no path tracing, there's actually a lot more contrast in the image. You get a lot brighter, you get probably a lot more contrast in depth of contrast. You get maybe a brighter color. You get a difference in color. You obviously get a bigger difference between the shaded areas. Like I say, between the contrasted areas, you're not getting that light bounce, which is reflecting back, which is illuminating obviously what would be direct shadowed, like here, compared to we've got a comparison at the end. We'll get to the comparison at the end, but we'll start at the start of this video. I'm not going to watch all of these the whole way through because the video will take an hour. But we're starting this off with the path tracing with DLSS at performance. Now, we are running an internal screen capture. We're running internal on both GPUs. So when we go to the 7900 XTX, we're running internal. It does take up about 10 FPS, and it does take up VRAM to run the internal capture. So at the moment, you can see we're at 15969, which will be our allocation. If I wasn't running this capture, that would drop down to about 15.3. It does make a difference. It kind of seems as if this game is now pretty much on the basis of the settings of Full RT Ultra at DLSS performance. It is catered to play at those settings and just about be within VRAM. And I've been playing the game I've gone through this level, the level after it. I'm in the jungle. I've been playing it on the 4080 and it's run perfectly fine. There's no kind of memory leak where the memory has started going up. It seems to be catered to run within those boundaries of those settings until you hit screen capture. And as soon as you hit screen capture, you bump up that VRAM. So unfortunately, I don't have a different method of doing it. That's kind of what we're going to have to go with. You're going to have to take my word for it. But anyway, so this is basically DLSS performance, as you can see, running the full path tracing mode. It's a slightly softer image. Now, there is a sharpening slider in the game. If you wanted to use it, you might like the slightly softer image. You might prefer a slightly sharper image. I believe at default, the sharpening slider is set to 50%. So obviously you can go down to 0%. You can go up to 100%. How much difference that makes, I don't know. I didn't mess around with it. I've been playing it with these exact settings. Obviously, by the time this goes to YouTube, it will look even softer. It's not been a problem for me. I've not actually noticed it. Nothing stood out. I actually started playing the game with these settings, and I never actually played it running it with the Supreme settings just at DLSS quality. It does sharpen up the image a bit, but I didn't feel like this was a soft image as I was playing through the game. So I didn't actually find it that bad. Whether you'd want to, obviously, like I said, obviously if you see this back in real life rather than a recording, it does look sharper. Everything looks brighter and sharper in real life compared to by the time you've captured it and sent it to YouTube. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. YouTube will never represent what you are actually going to see in real life. But as you can see in this area, it's totally fine. It's running fine. Obviously, if you look at the VRAM allocation, it does look a little bit scary. That does come down if you're not screen capturing it, but it's still tight. Obviously, this is the ultra settings. So this is fine. I'm not going to play the full video because that'll take forever. We go to the very ultra settings. And at very ultra settings, you can see I've got this warning and we've gone over. We've gone just over. Now, you'll see performance will drop huge. Going from changing the texture pool from very to very ultra to supreme does nothing in the way of performance. It does not change your performance whatsoever. What it does is either obviously use VRAM. So you can see now it's cut our performance by half. Now, what I did notice, obviously there's no way of me capturing it unless I do it on my phone. I did do it on my phone, but I haven't put it on this. If someone wants to see it, I can throw it up in a short. I noticed that obviously it was almost as if the frame generation had stopped working. So that I thought was a bit odd. And obviously I noticed that our allocation running the very ultra settings had now gone over this. As soon as I hit my shortcut key to stop recording, it went below and my frame rate went back up to 90 or 100 FPS and everything was running fine. So whether you could actually run at the very ultra, I don't know. What I will say is I also see no difference. So it's almost a case of, is there any point in me doing that and maybe getting a stutter here and there because it's just gone over VRAM or not, when I can't physically see a difference? What I'll also say is I didn't see a difference in this scene with this Supreme either. But I did notice one in another scene. So there's probably no point me running through this any further because it will take up too much video time. Did we do? Yeah, so we did this Supreme, and you can tell now, obviously, it's not showing it there, actually. For some reason on the Supreme, it's actually showing, oh no, okay, it's gone up a bit there. So again, it's not going to allocate VRAM that I don't have. This isn't going to suddenly show it's at 20 gigabytes because it's not there to show it. It's basically saying you're going over, and that's it. So Supreme is not going to happen. There's no way that you're going to run the Supreme. Oh, saying that, sorry. Yes. So there's no way that you're going to run this Supreme settings with path tracing. It's just not going to happen. You can see it's turned into a bit of a mess. It's obviously fighting, trying to clear the pool. It's done. So obviously this is now ray tracing off. You can see it's a lot more of a contrast image. Some people might prefer this, some people might not. It's quite interesting. Like I said, I've been playing the game. I started it off. I only started it the other day. I have previously looked at it, but it wasn't a game that I was going to particularly bother playing in. But I've actually played quite far into it because I wanted to get to the jungle section. Because I knew that that was the more demanding section. And before I made this video, I wanted to make sure that when I got to the jungle section, that the settings that I was saying were fine to play the game were still fine to actually play the game. And they're fine. I was playing through the jungle section last night. So, yes, this is, like I said, a lot more of a contrast image. You can kind of see if we go back to a similar image here. God, where am I? No. I do actually have this. Come on. Where do I go to that image? Here. So you can see, obviously, with the path tracing, you get more light bleed around these edges. You can see this detail. You can see a bit more detail down here. It's not as shadowed. You can see we now have shadows on the back of the books and stuff like that. Whereas if you go to here with the non-path tracing, there's not the light bleed around the edge anymore. It's quite shadowed. You don't have this shadow detail on the back of the books and stuff like that. This is more shadowed. We do have a side-by-side that we will look at. Probably the biggest difference in this scene is this, and it stands out like a sore thumb, is the railing. The railing is huge down here. If we go to a path trace one, you can see that we don't have that. We just have this faded in detail. How much this image changes, I don't know. We'll have a quick look. So yeah, you can see here. So this is non-path traced. And then obviously this here is path traced. So I didn't do a full side by the side of this. I suppose you can see here there's a bit more illumination down the sides here, is there maybe? I'm going to guess there probably is. Yeah, those are a bit darker. Well, that one's darker. Those ones are illuminated. So, yeah. I do have now. So, as you can see, this is ray tracing with the Ultra. This is ray tracing with the Very Ultra. This is ray tracing with the Supreme. And this is no ray tracing with DLSS at quality. Obviously, all of this is 4K. So, big difference in color palette, how it changes the color. Obviously, light bouncing, reflecting, or not bouncing and reflecting. You can see, like I was saying before, this shadow detail down here is different. It changes the color of the scene a bit. That kind of looks a little bit more, I don't know what color. I'd say that goes a little bit more greenish looking compared to what this color palette is. But as far as it goes, I was kind of staring quite well at this, and you can see this is obviously, all of this is DLSS performance, this is DLSS quality. And like I was saying, the difference in sharpness isn't massive. It's barely noticeable. You know, this is DLSS performance to DLSS quality. So, there is a difference. I think a lot of it is obviously a contrast difference. You can see obviously this shadow details are different. The shadow on this is different. This looks more illuminated. Obviously this is darker. People might prefer this. I have no problem with that. One will give you what probably looks like a more detailed image because you get more contrast in it, whereas this you get less contrast because you've got more light in it. As a computer game, I can understand why someone might say, I prefer this because I see more detail because of the contrast. I can then understand people who say, I prefer it with ray tracing because it's a more realistic, true to life scene. I can understand both of those arguments. But as you can see, going from the Ultra to the Supreme in this, and obviously this is Supreme, I couldn't see any difference, as in like anything, any fine details that appeared to be missing because this is only running the Ultra preset versus this is running the Supreme preset. I could still make out all of these little details everywhere. Now when we go to the next scene, I did notice something. So now we're in the desert and things have changed quite rapidly. So this is running, I believe we are on, yes, we're on the 4080. I can tell obviously by the amount of power that it's pulling. So this is on the 4080 and this is using no path tracing. So this has got a far more contrast image. You can see shadows and you can see details in this far more. So this is at the Supreme setting. There's more kind of shadows and stuff that becomes more detailed out here. We'll run it through. So let me just double check that I am being right. So yeah, we're at the Supreme settings. We're not using any RT, and as you can see, we have no VRAM limitation. We're fine. We're running DLSS quality because why not? We're at 4K. It doesn't look any worse or any better than native. And yeah, all of this looks way more contrasty than when you turn on path tracing. I wanted to obviously check a kind of movement to see what was breaking up and what wasn't. And what does break up is the fine power lines. DLSS it's not perfect in this. It doesn't change much when you actually go down to balanced and performance. It's a case of everything, native, FSR, XeSS, has a problem with fine lines in this game. You can see that one's breaking up a little bit. The trees are fine. Power lines are a little bit shimmery there. When you're headed towards them, they're not so bad. When you're headed kind of side by side, they break up a little bit. We're going to see way more contrasty than when we move to path tracing. So again, some people might prefer the no RT versus the RT. It is a very different look to it. You can see the power lines there are just not holding up very well. They're extremely fine detail. I did go through, I believe, a couple of different settings between DLAA and native. Native held it up. What was I about to do? I don't really want to do... I think this is native. Yeah, because we dropped down to 90 FPS. So this is native, and it kind of tries to hold them, but they don't load. It's like that one's now invisible. There's no line there anymore. So And native also actually gives you a bit more motion blur out at distance. So native isn't perfect in this game. We did try DLAA as well, but this isn't particularly what this video is about, so I'm not going to spend too much time. That might be DLAA. But other than that, everything else holds up pretty well. This is a far more contrasty image than what we get when we go to path tracing. So as you can see, we can run 4K, everything cranked out with no RT in the exact same scenario as what we can with the 7900 XTX. We've now gone to DLSS performance. We are using FrameGen in this. It runs fine. It runs smooth. I haven't seen it cause any real issues. So now we have less contrast image on the block work. We have less contrast image in these bushes. Probably not so noticeable when you go from scene to scene, but I will show you at the end we have a side-by-side. I went through a few details up here because when we drop down to FSR or something like that, the difference is massive. Remember, this is now DLSS performance. So 1080p, I believe that is upscale to 4K. You can see now there's a lot less contrast in this image. If I just quick pause it and try to go back to, the difference is huge. Like the contrast image here versus this, wait, yeah, is massive, massive. Now you might prefer that versus that, and I can kind of understand why, because it does almost give you that look of you're getting way more detail. I don't believe you get more detail. We'll go through that at the end. I think that's just a case of, obviously, when you kind of look at the way that the shadows are directed in this scene, now the shadows are running in this direction. So should you have a load of shadow detail down the blockwork of this pyramid? No, you shouldn't, because the sun's shining on it. So when you look at it in this image here, and the shadows are running in the direction they're running, the side of this should have the sun on it, and you shouldn't have all of this shadow detail. Again, like I said, one's probably a bit more realistic, one's probably, I mean, when you look at the shadows of this tree, the shadows are running in almost behind it, making it look as if the sun's behind, like directly behind my character at the moment. Then you see them on kind of these plants, and they're kind of more almost headed that direction. Then on this plant, they're headed in this direction. So shadows there, shadows coming this way. Figure that one out. Shadows going that direction. Who knows? But anyway, we'll carry on with the path tracing. Like I said, the other one was DLSS quality. This is now DLSS performance. The lines you can see along here, there's this one that kind of warbles a bit. The rest of the image is pretty stable. To be fair, DLSS performance is very stable. So I'm kind of like, okay, so am I getting a limited experience by running path tracing at the moment? I don't think I am. To a degree. As in, you're going to have to decide, do you prefer the look of path tracing, or do you prefer the look of not path tracing? And then decide from that which one you want to run. I don't think actually visually, as in textures and details and what you're actually going to notice in the game, I don't think that you're getting anything is becoming limited. It's just a different style of image. And do you prefer the path tracing look, or do you prefer the because all of this now becomes, if you kind of look here, all of these bushes, because of the direction of the sun shining directly on them, they don't have that kind of shadow detail that makes everything individually stand out. So what I mean is, when you're running without path tracing, it's almost like you've got a very fine tip black pen and you've outlined all of the details. If I can find an image of the non-path tracing look. If I can find that bush. Find me that bush. Yes. So here you can see this is non-path tracing. Let me just play that bit. And you suddenly have, obviously, all this kind of shadow detail put in there that technically the sun's shining right on this. So you're not going to have this detail that you're seeing, obviously, with the path tracing. And this is where I've put them side by side. So this shows up more what I'm saying. As you can see, you have a lot of kind of more pronounced detail. And in this scene here, you have less shadow detail because the sun is shining directly on this. As far as what are you losing in the image, if you look at stuff like this little bottle, it's exactly the same. If you look at kind of any of these details, they're the same. They're just shadowed in a different way. This one has a more pronounced shadow down this tree. This one has like a more kind of random shadow, maybe not as obvious. A different contrast looking to the screen. Now there are contrast things that you can change in the game menu. I haven't messed around with them. Maybe playing around with those on the path tracing and getting it to look exactly how you might like it to look is an option. I don't know. You can see there, like the shadow details in this tree are like hugely different. And it changes the way that those trees out there look. If anything, I actually think those trees there, with that shadow detail on the non-path traced, kind of actually do look a little bit better. That does look a little bit nicer. Now, whether it's realistic or not, that's the case for other people to decide whether they think it is or not. As far as it goes, obviously this is running the Ultra and this is running the Supreme texture detail. And I can now see a difference. I can't in some scenes I can. And where I'd say I've noticed the difference in this, and it's not huge, but it's on the ground detail. So there are sections like here where you've got some high textures and some high textures. And there's a little patch there that looks a little bit lower textured. And in this, you don't have that. It's all filled in as higher textures. There is some, here it looks lower textured. Down through this part, it looks lower textured, and down through this part. So it's not as if there are no low textures added in. There's just more, like there's probably a patch where it looks like a slightly lower texture. Here you get more. So you get like a streak running through there that looks a little bit lower texture. It's very hard to see. In game, I don't think you'll notice it, but that is the only area where I could really notice a difference. Obviously, there's a different contrast to the image, so these details here do look slightly more contrasty in that. Maybe they are of a slightly higher level in some of them. Let me know what you noticed. As far as it goes, I don't think it's changing the details of this. I think it's just changing the way that they're shadowed. Because when you obviously change, like here, you can see this has got a higher contrast of shadow, but it's got sun directly shining against it. So it shouldn't have this shadow detail, whereas obviously this side doesn't have the strong shadow detail that this would have, because it has the sun directly on it. I don't believe that that's a case of it's changing the actual textures itself to better textures. It's just changing the way that those details are being shadowed. That's my interpretation of it. If I'm wrong, let me know. So then we go to, I believe I added the AMD on the end of this. Now, let's have a look. Yes, so now we're on the AMD path tracing, and now we are using the same settings. So we're not using frame generation. For some reason, whenever I turn on, I managed to load into the game. The game was crashing. It would not load. I was getting extremely frustrated, and the reason was because I had frame generation on. That's what I got it down to after having to hard restart my PC about 8 times. It seemed to be because I was running frame generation. Now, someone's told me they're playing it with frame generation, and I completely understand that. They don't have the exact same, obviously, PC that I'm running, and they're probably not running the same settings. So I've got no reason to lie. I've got no reason to believe that they've got a reason to lie. It's just one of those things. I did try running I did manage to get into a game. I played the game for a little bit. I clicked frame gen on the AMD GPU and it insta crashed. So I don't know. Maybe I've got a problem with my GPU. I don't know. It's been running other games fine. It just seems to be. This is also the Xbox version, or the whatever you call it, Game Pass. This is a Game Pass version. Whether that's a problem in the Game Pass version that the Steam version doesn't have, I don't know. It's not unknown. So we're now using these same settings on the AMD GPU. And you can kind of see already that we have an issue. So we have like these... I'll show you obviously settings. So I did run this at FSR. It is not the best option for the AMD GPU. XeSS is. But XeSS isn't particularly great either. It's not bad, it is better. The other thing that I did notice is, for some reason, the ray trace shadows has an only sunlight, whereas on the NVIDIA GPU you have a all lighting. So there's an extra setting there. So yeah, we're at FSR performance, and you can kind of notice it's all very pixelated now around these things. There's also some kind of strange here and there. You can see it like artifacting. There's some kind of artifacting along here, which is causing a flickering thing. Altogether, it's a softer image and it's a little bit of a low res image. When you're stationary, it's not that bad. As soon as you move, it goes to not great. And obviously, to be fair, we wouldn't be turning frame generation on anyway, because obviously we're stationary at the moment, but when you start moving around, we're going to drop down in performance quite rapidly. What I noticed is this area isn't hugely ray traced. So the performance from ray tracing on to ray tracing off in this area isn't huge, and it's probably because it doesn't have as much assets to obviously ray trace against or bounce against as what it does when you get into the jungle section. So this is actually quite high. You can see here, like, I don't even know what's... I mean, admittedly, performance upscale is always bad. It's just DLSS 4 has changed the way that performance upscale is. But as you can see there, there's some like really bad kind of artifacting that is now coming off the side of this. Quite obvious. Like I said, I did actually realize that XeSS was available. It is better, but it's still not great. I think we did try XeSS at one point. So you can see, just stood there, you've got like this thing flickering away. And on movement, everything starts to, like you can see here, that's breaking up. Those towers then break up a little bit more. We get further down into the scene and stuff becomes a little bit more apparent. So you could play like this if you wanted to play like this. There's nothing stopping you personally. I wouldn't. I think this really is like, too much of a reduction in quality compared to just playing it with no ray tracing. So you can see there, this image starts to break up. The trees do tend to start to pixelate and shimmer. The lines are a bit worse, or a fair bit worse. So you can see like these poles, like that pole there is just breaking up massively. Something's doing something crazy down there. I don't know what that was doing, some sort of artifacting. And then, yeah, you can see like it's not just the lines anymore. The whole tower starts to break up. So it's kind of too much to ask. And as you can see, like this is almost a playable experience. When we get to the jungle, it's no longer a playable experience because the jungle hits them both hard, a lot harder when it comes to the path tracing. So we're going to quick go over to that in a second, just so we can finish the video off and we don't end up dragging out too long. We're already at 35 minutes. So let's click this one because that's not particularly the full story. Now we're on the AMD GPU. Now we are running at, this isn't, you have to reset the game every time you want to change settings, which is really annoying. So at this moment in time, this is using the ultra settings with no ray tracing. So 7900 XTX, you can see there, we're pulling 400 watts. Pretty obvious that that's a 7900 XTX. Like I said, we're on the Ultra rather than the Supreme. It could run the Supreme. There's not a huge difference to be noticed. But I didn't want to have to restart the game when I changed the settings, because you have to, when you change the texture settings, you have to restart the game. So we're going to go to the full ray tracing. We are on FSR. No, sorry, we're on XES Ultra Quality, I think it is, which is basically quality. So you can see now we've gone down to like 11 FPS. It's game over. Obviously, this is on the equivalent of FSR quality, but it's XESS Ultra Quality, because they've decided to do something stupid compared to what all the others do. So yeah, it's not playable anymore. It's done. It's goosed. It's game over. This is way more intensive area, but both GPUs will run kind of with an upscaler. You can run 4K with the Supreme settings down here at obviously FSR quality, XeSS quality, or DLSS quality. They both still give you a decent frame rate down here, obviously without using the path tracing. So we've gone down to performance on XeSS to try and claw back some performance. At performance, searching for performance, and we didn't get performance. Unfortunately, we've just got a much kind of softer, low resolution image, and effectively at this point it's pretty obvious that there is no comeback. There is nothing we can do. Going to ultra performance is probably at this frame rate going to give us an extra 3 or 4 FPS if we're lucky. I did just want to check, obviously, with FSR at performance, because that will give us the equivalent of what we're running on the NVIDIA GPU. The difference is we are using FrameGen on the NVIDIA GPU. It's not something that I'm doing on purpose. It's just not something that I'm not about to change the settings on. If I can do more videos on it if someone really wants to see the difference. I mean, to be fair, you can just look at online benchmarks. Online benchmarks, if you want to see the difference between the 7900 XTX and the 4080, is probably better for you to look at, because I'm running different CPUs, so it's not a apples to apples comparison. But here we are running the 4080 with path tracing. Like I said, we are using frame generation. We are losing around 10 FPS on both GPUs. I need to make that apparent again, because we are screen capturing. So we would be at about 80. Well, now we'd be at, just add 10 on to whatever you see here, and add 10 on to whatever the AMD GPU was. Or 8. Somewhere between 8 and 10 is generally where we're at, because so now it'd be 78, or it keeps changing so drastically. There's no point me saying what it would be. You can figure it out. So I think we'd be, without FrameGen, we'd still probably be mid 50s to 60, because frame generation hardly adds anything on this. It does smooth out the image. Everything does work. And that's kind of what NVIDIA do with these things. Like, they're not wrong. When they add these features and you use them all together, it works. It's not like you're adding on a feature and every time you've got some sort of give and take. For some reason with FrameGen in these games, when you add it on, you're like, oh, hold on, that's actually improved, rather than it's given me like too much of a negative value. The one thing that I did notice here was, like I said, it's not perfect. Obviously the water has got, I'm going to assume, is like screen space reflected. It doesn't look particularly good, and you get that screen space reflection of ghosting of images. So you'll see these dragonflies do ghost a bit over the water. That's one thing that I noticed. I didn't see anything much else in the way in this game. You can see, like I said, we're running the ultra textures. Game looks awesome. So I'm not feeling like I'm limiting my experience. That's what I think that someone said, that you're limiting your experience by running path tracing. I'm playing it like this, and I'm thinking I'm not limiting my experience. I don't feel like this is a particularly limited experience. I think everything still looks amazing. I don't think that the going from Ultra to Supreme is a big enough experience compared to going from no RT to path traced. So, and that's probably a good place. Oh, the other thing that I was going to say is, because one thing that I did want to look at, and I think this probably clears it up here, which is a bit of a shame, because I was in the mind of thinking with the 7900, with the 9070 XT. Now, the benchmarks don't particularly make sense to me, or the performance gains, I'm not sure. I can kind of understand some of them. Some of them I'm thinking, when you actually look at the specs and the apparently 42 or 44% gain, which would take the 9070 XT over the 7900 XTX, when you look at the leaked specs of it, there's no way that it's beating the 7900 XTX. So I'm going to take that a little bit tongue-in-cheek until we see, because either the specs are wrong or the way that they're presenting the performance gains is wrong. It could be the leak specs are wrong. I don't know. But when you actually look at the actual specs of the GPU and its cores and all the rest of it, I don't see how it beats an XTX. I know obviously it has a higher clock speed, but a higher clock speed isn't going to get you that. You can obviously, I could overclock this 7900 XTX from 2.8 to 3 gigahertz, and it doesn't give me a 20% uplift. So I'm not sure about that. The other thing is, I was kind of thinking, okay, will the AMD GPU, so the 9070 XT, if it gets a big performance increase, let's say hypothetically, it matches the 5070 Ti. The 5070 Ti will be able to play, path traced like this. It's got the same amount of VRAM. It might be slightly less on FPS, but it will still be able to, I imagine it will be able to play these settings. The AMD GPU won't, unless they figure out. So if the AMD GPU was to match the 5070 Ti in raster and ray tracing performance, then AMD are going to have to figure out a way to manage their VRAM, because this is how much VRAM the AMD GPU is using to run the same settings. So this is the AMD GPU running path tracing, and it's using over 17 gigabytes versus the 4080. Where were we? Where's the 4080? Yes, versus the 4080, which is using 14 gigabytes. AMD GPU using 17 gigabytes. So massive difference there. And the 9070 XT might not be able to run the path trace if it's got the power to. It might have the power to, but being limited to its 16 gigabytes, unless AMD figure out a way that they can use less VRAM, because they generally use more VRAM to run the same task. Who knows? It is a different architect. It maybe once they've got more dedicated RT cores, it will change the way that it uses VRAM. I don't know. But you can see here that it's allocating like 20 and it's using nearly 18, whereas the NVIDIA GPU is using 14. Crazy. So that's it. I'm not going to go any longer because it's 45 minutes and no one is going to watch to the end of this. They're going to say, fuck that. And I don't blame you. If you did watch to the end of it, you're a god. Give me a like. I would appreciate it. I'll give you a like in return because you watched a 45-minute video of me talking trash. But who knows? I'm going to do more videos on it because it's quite interesting. I'm probably going to get to more detailed areas, switch between Supreme and Ultra again, just to see how limited of an experience you get if you do drop that, and some of the other scenes to maybe see how much of a difference the image is between path tracing and non-path tracing. This area wasn't the best for it, so I'm going to end it there. Like I said, if you did watch it, I do appreciate you, and I'll catch you in the next one.